The Olympic National Forest stretches for nearly 1 million acres of dense wilderness, where cell towers die and search parties lose hope. Dr. Sarah Chen knew these woods better than anyone. She'd spent 5 years documenting indigenous burial sites for the university. That's why her disappearance during a routine survey made no sense. 8 months pregnant, experienced, and carrying enough supplies for 3 days, she simply vanished without a trace. 3 weeks later, deer hunters stumbled upon something impossible: Sarah, alive and healthy, cradling her newborn daughter among a group of people wearing traditional tribal clothing and speaking a language that died out centuries ago. But when the rescue team arrived, Sarah did something that shattered everything they thought they knew. She backed away, clutching her baby, and spoke in perfect English. "You don't understand. I can't leave. None of us can. They're not holding me prisoner. They're protecting me from what's coming." What had Sarah discovered in those woods that made her choose an ancient tribe over modern civilization? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Detective Marcus Rivera had seen plenty of missing person cases go cold, but Sarah Chen's file kept him awake at night. The forensic anthropologist from the University of Washington had been conducting her monthly survey of protected burial grounds when she vanished on October 15th. Her abandoned campsite told no story: tent still standing, research equipment untouched, no signs of struggle. Even her hiking boots remained neatly arranged outside the tent flap, as if she'd simply walked away barefoot into the wilderness. The search had consumed 3 weeks and cost the county nearly $40,000. Helicopters combed the canopy, bloodhounds lost her scent at a creek bed, and thermal imaging turned up nothing but deer and elk. Sarah's husband, David, had camped at the ranger station, refusing to leave until Marcus finally convinced him that the October weather would soon make further searches impossible. That's when everything changed. Tom Kowalski and his hunting partner, Ray Mendez, had been tracking a wounded buck deeper into the forest than they'd ever ventured. They followed a game trail that seemed to wind endlessly through stands of ancient cedars, some so massive that 3 men couldn't wrap their arms around them. The trees here felt different, older, more watchful. Even their GPS started giving conflicting readings. "We should head back," Ray had muttered, checking his compass for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. "This place gives me the creeps." Tom was about to agree when they heard it, the unmistakable cry of a human baby echoing through the trees. They looked at each other in disbelief. No roads led this deep into the wilderness. The nearest trail was miles behind them. Following the sound, they pushed through a wall of ferns and stepped into a clearing that defied explanation. Smoke rose from a central fire pit, surrounded by structures that looked like something from a museum display, perfectly constructed shelters of cedar bark and animal hide. People moved between them with quiet purpose, dressed in clothing that belonged to another century. And there, sitting cross-legged beside the fire, was Dr. Sarah Chen. She looked radiant in a way that seemed impossible for someone who'd been missing for 3 weeks in the wilderness. Her dark hair was braided with small bones and feathers, her clothes replaced by soft deerskin. In her arms, a newborn baby slept peacefully, wrapped in what appeared to be rabbit fur. The tribal members noticed the hunters first. Without alarm or hostility, they simply turned to observe the strangers, their faces calm but alert. An elderly woman with intricate tattoos covering her chin approached Sarah and whispered something in a language that sounded like wind through leaves. Sarah looked up and saw Tom and Ray standing at the edge of the clearing, their hunting rifles forgotten in their hands. Her eyes widened with something that might have been recognition, or perhaps regret. "You need to leave," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly across the space between them. "Go back the way you came, and don't tell anyone what you've seen." But Tom was already backing away, fumbling for his satellite phone. "Ma'am, we're here to help. Everyone's been looking for you. Your husband—" "Tom, don't." Sarah's voice carried a note of desperation. "Please, you don't understand what you're interfering with." Ray grabbed his partner's arm. "We have to call this in. She needs medical attention. The baby... The baby is fine. Sarah stood slowly, and the tribal members seemed to shift closer, not threateningly but protectively. We're all fine. But if you bring others here, if you tell them what you've found, you'll destroy something that can never be replaced. Tom's finger hovered over the phone's emergency button. Every instinct told him to call for help, to get this woman and her child back to civilization, to safety. But something in Sarah's eyes gave him pause, a depth of knowledge that seemed to encompass secrets older than the forest itself. "What happened to you out here?" he whispered. Sarah looked down at her daughter, then back at the two hunters who had stumbled into her new world. "I found the truth." The helicopter's rotors chopped through the morning air as Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the window, watching the endless green canopy of the Amazon stretch below. 3 months. Sarah Chen had been missing for 3 months, and this was their first real lead. "There!" The pilot's voice crackled through her headset. 2 o'clock, about half a click out." Elena squinted through the glass and spotted the thin column of smoke rising from a clearing barely visible through the trees. Her heart hammered against her ribs. As the head of the Anthropological Search and Rescue Division, she'd seen plenty of false alarms, but something about this felt different. The hunters who'd radioed in their discovery had been adamant. They'd seen a pregnant white woman living among a group of indigenous people in an area that was supposed to be uninhabited. The helicopter touched down in a small meadow, and Elena climbed out with her team, Marcus Webb, a cultural liaison with 20 years of experience in remote contact situations, and Dr. James Morrison, a physician specializing in tropical medicine. They'd left the military escort at the base camp, hoping to avoid appearing threatening to whoever they might encounter. The jungle closed around them like a living wall. Elena had spent half her career in remote locations, but this place felt ancient in a way that made her skin crawl. The trees were massive, some easily 8 feet in diameter, and draped with vines that seemed to filter the sunlight into an eerie green glow. No birds sang, no insects buzzed, even their footsteps seemed muffled by the oppressive silence. "The hunters said they followed the river north from here," Marcus whispered, consulting his GPS. "About 2 kilometers upstream." They moved in single file, following what might have once been a game trail. Elena's mind raced through the possibilities. Sarah had been conducting a routine botanical survey for her dissertation when she'd vanished. Her abandoned campsite had yielded no clues, no signs of struggle, no indication of where she might have gone. It was as if she'd simply walked into the forest and disappeared. The sound of running water reached them before they saw the river, a dark ribbon cutting through the jungle floor. Marcus held up his hand, signaling them to stop. "Smoke," he breathed, pointing upstream. Elena caught the scent. Wood smoke, but also something else, something that smelled like cooking meat and unfamiliar spices. Her pulse quickened as they crept forward, using the thick vegetation as cover. The village appeared suddenly, as if it had materialized from the jungle itself. Elena counted perhaps 15 structures, built from materials that seemed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding forest. The architecture was unlike anything she'd encountered in her studies, organic curves and flowing lines that seemed to grow from the earth rather than being imposed upon it. And there were people. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she watched them moving through the village. Their clothing was woven from fibers she couldn't identify, dyed in colors that seemed to shift and change in the dappled light. But it was their movements that struck her most, graceful, almost fluid, as if they were dancing rather than simply walking. "My God," Marcus whispered beside her. "Look at their tools." Elena followed his gaze and felt her academic mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The implements these people carried were clearly sophisticated, but made from materials and using techniques she couldn't begin to identify. Spear points that gleamed like metal but were clearly organic, containers that seemed to be grown rather than crafted. "There," Dr. Morrison hissed, grabbing Elena's arm. A woman emerged from one of the larger structures, and Elena's heart nearly stopped. Even from a distance, even with her hair braided in an unfamiliar style and her skin darkened by months in the sun, There was no mistaking Sarah Chen. She was visibly pregnant, her belly round beneath a flowing garment that seemed to shimmer in the filtered sunlight. Elena was about to step forward when Sarah suddenly turned in their direction. For a moment, their eyes met across the clearing, and Elena saw something in Sarah's expression that made her freeze. Not relief or joy at seeing potential rescuers. Fear. Sarah's lips moved, forming a single word that Elena couldn't hear but could read. Run. Before Elena could react, the village erupted into motion. The inhabitants moved with impossible speed and coordination, forming a protective circle around Sarah. But they weren't looking at the three hidden observers. They were looking up at the sky, where the distant sound of helicopter rotors was growing steadily louder. Elena realized with growing horror that their pilot hadn't waited at the landing site as instructed. He was coming back for them, and his approach was causing panic among the villagers. Sarah was shouting now, gesturing frantically at the sky and then toward the jungle where Elena and her team were hidden. The fear in her voice carried clearly across the clearing, though the words were in no language Elena recognized. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. The helicopter's rotors cut through the morning air as Sarah Chen pressed her face against the window, watching the endless canopy of Douglas firs stretch below. 3 days had passed since the hunter's radio call, and the search and rescue coordinator had been skeptical until they produced the photographs. Grainy images of a woman who bore an unmistakable resemblance to Dr. Elena Vasquez. "GPS shows we're approaching the coordinates," shouted pilot Marcus Reed over the engine noise. "But I'm telling you, there's nowhere to land in this terrain." Sarah adjusted her headset and studied the topographical maps spread across her lap. As Elena's research partner and closest friend, she'd insisted on joining the rescue team despite the university's protests. The official story was that Elena had suffered some kind of psychological break, pregnancy hormones, isolation stress, the usual explanations when a woman did something unexpected. But Sarah knew better. Elena was the most methodical person she'd ever met, someone who planned her grocery lists weeks in advance. Below them, the forest appeared untouched by modern civilization. No logging roads, no power lines, just an unbroken sea of green that seemed to swallow sound and light alike. Sarah had studied these mountains for years, knew their geological history like scripture, yet this particular valley felt foreign somehow, as if it existed outside the normal flow of time. "There," called out Jake Morrison, the lead hunter who'd guided them back. He pointed toward a thin column of smoke rising from a clearing, barely visible through the canopy. "That's where we saw her." The helicopter circled lower, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Through breaks in the trees, she glimpsed structures that shouldn't exist, not the random arrangement of a modern camp, but the deliberate patterns of permanent settlement. Longhouses with cedar shake roofs, raised platforms for food storage, and people moving between them with the unhurried purpose of daily routine. "Jesus Christ," muttered Dr. Richard Holbrook, the department head who demanded to oversee the rescue personally. "How is this possible?" Sarah pulled out her binoculars, scanning the settlement below. The architecture was unmistakably Pacific Northwest indigenous, specifically Coast Salish, judging by the construction techniques. But the Quilcene people had been declared extinct in 1847, victims of smallpox and forced relocation. She'd written papers about them, studied their artifacts in museums, never imagining she might see their cultural traditions alive and thriving. There, Jake pointed again, the woman in the blue shirt by the fire pit. Sarah focused the binoculars, and her heart nearly stopped. Elena sat cross-legged beside a smoking fire, her dark hair braided with what looked like cedar bark, her hands resting protectively over her rounded belly. She was speaking animatedly with an elderly woman whose face bore the intricate tattoos Sarah had only seen in 19th-century photographs. "We need to get down there," Holbrook said. "Find a place to land." "Not happening," Reed replied. "Nearest clearing big enough for this bird is 3 miles east. You'll have to hike in." As they circled again, searching for alternatives, Sarah noticed something that made her stomach clench. Elena wasn't just sitting with the tribe. She was dressed like them, moved like them, participated in their activities with the easy familiarity of belonging. This wasn't a woman being held against her will. This was someone who had found home. The helicopter touched down in a meadow that felt impossibly far from the settlement, though Sarah's GPS showed only 2 miles. The moment the rotors stopped spinning, the silence pressed in around them like a living thing. No bird calls, no insect buzz, no wind through the trees, just the sound of their own breathing and the tick of cooling metal. "Stay close," Jake warned as they shouldered their packs. "This place, it's easy to get turned around." The hike should have been straightforward: follow the ridge, descend into the valley, locate the smoke. But within an hour, Sarah realized they were walking in circles. Jake consulted his compass repeatedly, frowning at readings that seemed to shift without explanation. The forest felt actively hostile, trails that had appeared clear from above vanishing into impenetrable thickets, streams flowing uphill in defiance of gravity. "This is impossible," Holbrook panted after they passed the same lightning-struck cedar for the 3rd time. "We're trained professionals with GPS, and your technology won't help you here." They spun toward the voice. A man stepped from behind a tree that Sarah would have sworn was too narrow to hide anyone. He was young, maybe 30, with the same traditional tattoos she'd seen on the elderly woman. But his English was perfect, unaccented, as if he'd learned it in university rather than isolation. "Elena is safe," he continued calmly, "but she cannot see you, not yet, not until you understand what you're truly asking of her." Sarah found her voice. "I'm her friend, her research partner. She's pregnant. She needs medical care." The man's smile held no warmth. "She has the finest care available, care your world cannot provide." He studied each of them in turn, his gaze lingering on Sarah. "But perhaps it's time you learned why she chose to stay." "What do you mean you can't leave?" Marcus kept his voice gentle but firm. "Sarah, your husband is worried sick. The university sent a search team. People think you're dead." A shadow passed across her face, so brief he almost missed it. "Maybe that would be better." The old woman beside Sarah spoke again in that lilting language, her tone urgent. Sarah nodded and responded, then turned back to Marcus. "Grandmother Yuki says the forest spirits are restless today. She says you brought dark energy with you." Jake snorted behind him. "Forest spirits. Right. Look, lady, I don't know what kind of Stockholm Syndrome thing you've got going on here, but we're taking you home. Your baby needs proper medical care." Sarah's hand moved protectively to her belly, and for the first time, Marcus saw genuine fear in her eyes. "You don't understand. The baby—" She stopped abruptly, glancing at the gathered tribe members who had begun to murmur among themselves. "What about the baby, Sarah?" Marcus stepped closer, noting how the warriors tensed at his movement. "Is something wrong? Are you sick?" "I'm not sick." Her voice was barely a whisper. "But I'm not entirely human anymore." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd seen a lot of things in his years of search and rescue, people driven mad by isolation, survivors who'd convinced themselves of impossible things to cope with trauma. But something in Sarah's tone made his skin crawl. "Sarah, listen to me. You've been in the forest for 3 months. Isolation can play tricks on your mind. Whatever these people have told you, they didn't tell me anything." She stood slowly, and Marcus noticed the fluid grace of her movement, almost predatory. "They showed me, and then my body started changing." She pulled back the sleeve of her woven garment, revealing her forearm. At first glance it looked normal, but as Marcus stared, he realized the skin had an odd quality to it, almost translucent, with dark veins visible beneath that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. "Jesus Christ," Jake breathed. The old woman, Grandmother Yuki, began speaking rapidly, gesturing toward the forest. Several of the younger tribe members backed away, and Marcus caught the universal tone of warning in her voice. "What's she saying?" he demanded. Sarah's eyes had gone distant. "She says they're coming. The changed ones. They hunt when the sun is high." She focused on Marcus with sudden intensity. You have to leave, now. If they find you here, if they catch your scent—" A sound echoed through the forest, low, haunting, definitely not human. It raised every hair on Marcus's arms. Around the clearing, the tribe members began moving with practiced efficiency, gathering children, securing tools, preparing for something. What the hell was that? Jake had his rifle ready now, scanning the tree line. "The reason I can't leave," Sarah said. She was backing toward one of the huts, moving with the same urgent purpose as the others. "3 months ago, I stumbled into their territory. The Kitanawa found me after the attack. They saved my life, but they couldn't save all of me." The sound came again, closer this time, joined by others. A chorus of not quite human voices calling through the trees. "Sarah, we're not leaving without you. Marcus is training Ward with a primal urge to run. Whatever's out there, we can protect you." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Protect me? Marcus? I'm one of them now. The baby I'm carrying, it's changing too. If I leave this place, if I go back to the city—" She met his eyes, and he saw the terrible knowledge there. "I'll lose control. I'll hunt. I'll feed." The chorus of calls was getting louder, and Marcus could hear something crashing through the underbrush. Big. Multiple somethings. "The pregnancy accelerated the change," Sarah continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. "The Kitanawa know how to manage it, how to keep us stable, but in your world, around all those people—" She shook her head. "I'd become a monster." "This is insane," Jake muttered, but his voice was tight with fear. "This is completely—" The tree line exploded. What emerged wasn't quite human, wasn't quite animal. Tall, elongated figures with 2 long limbs and faces that might have been human once, but were now something else entirely. Their skin had the same translucent quality as Sarah's arm, but more pronounced, and their eyes were black, endless, hungry. Marcus grabbed for his radio with one hand and his weapon with the other, but Sarah's voice stopped him cold. "Don't move," she whispered, "and whatever you do, don't run. They can smell fear, and they love the chase." The emergency meeting convened at dawn in the university's Crisis Management Center, a sterile conference room that had never hosted anything more dramatic than budget disputes. Now it buzzed with tension as Dean Margaret Holloway faced a room full of investigators, university officials, and Dr. Sarah Chen's research colleagues. "Let me understand this correctly," Detective Ray Castellanos said, his weathered face creased with disbelief. "Dr. Chen claims she's been living with a tribe that's been officially extinct for 2 centuries? Dr. James Morrison, Sarah's research partner, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The Kahani were documented as extinct by 1823. Disease, displacement, the usual colonial devastation. There hasn't been a confirmed sighting since then. Yet somehow our missing anthropologist stumbled across them during a routine soil survey." Agent Lisa Park from the FBI's Missing Persons Unit leaned forward. "And now she refuses to return?" Dean Holloway rubbed her temples. The migraine that had started with yesterday's phone call was now a full-blown assault. "The hunters who found her said she appeared different, healthy but changed. She spoke to them in a language they didn't recognize before switching to English. Thinner, but not malnourished. Her hair was longer, woven with some kind of plant fibers, and her eyes—" The dean paused, consulting her notes. "They said her eyes looked older. That's the word they used, older." Dr. Morrison cleared his throat. "If, and I stress if, there's any truth to this, we're looking at the anthropological discovery of the century, a completely isolated population maintaining their traditional ways for 200 years, the cultural implications alone—" "The immediate implication," Agent Park interrupted, "is that we have a pregnant American citizen being held against her will in the wilderness." "She's not being held," came a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned as Marcus Rivera, the lead hunter, entered without invitation. His clothes still carried the scent of wood smoke and pine needles. She chose to stay, made that crystal clear. Maybe not. But you're all talking about something you didn't see. Marcus's dark eyes swept the room. That woman isn't a prisoner. She's protecting something. Protecting what? Detective Castellanos demanded. Marcus hesitated, then pulled out his phone. The video was shaky, clearly shot from a distance, but it showed Sarah Chen standing at the edge of what appeared to be a traditional native village. Even in the poor quality footage, her pregnancy was obvious, but so was something else. Jesus, Dr. Morrison whispered. How far along is she? That's what doesn't make sense, Marcus said. She disappeared 3 months ago, right? But look at her. Sarah appeared to be in her 3rd trimester, her belly round and prominent beneath what looked like traditional woven garments. The timeline was impossible. Agent Park grabbed the phone, rewinding the footage. This has to be doctored. Feel free to check, Marcus replied. But I know what I saw, and I know what she told us. Which was? The dean asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Marcus met her gaze steadily. That if she comes back, if she leaves the forest, both she and the baby will die. Not might die, will die. She was absolutely certain about it. The room erupted in overlapping conversations, medical impossibilities, legal obligations, jurisdictional questions. But Dr. Morrison sat silent, his face pale as he stared at the frozen image on the phone screen. James Dean Holloway noticed his expression. What is it? The Kahani, he said slowly. I've been researching them since Sarah disappeared, hoping to find some clue. There were stories, legends, the surrounding tribes told about them. They called the Kahani the people who dream with the forest, meaning what exactly? Agent Park's patience was wearing thin. The stories said the Kahani could commune with the natural world in ways others couldn't, that the forest itself protected them, but in return, they could never truly leave. They were bound to it. Morrison's academic composure cracked slightly. I thought it was just mythology, cultural metaphor, but what if it's literal? Marcus finished. What if that's why she can't come back? Detective Castellanos slammed his hand on the table. This is insane. We're talking about rescue protocols, not fairy tales. But Dean Holloway was studying the phone screen, noting details that chilled her. Sarah's expression wasn't one of fear or coercion. It was serene, almost beatific, and behind her, barely visible in the shadows between trees, other figures watched. Their eyes seemed to glow with an inner light that the camera shouldn't have been able to capture. We're assembling a full rescue team, Agent Park announced. Medical personnel, negotiators, backup. Whatever's happening out there, Dr. Chen is coming home. Marcus pocketed his phone and headed for the door. Then you'd better bring body bags, he said quietly, because something tells me this isn't going to end the way any of us expect. The silence in the emergency response tent was deafening. Marcus Chen stared at the photograph Dr. Sarah Voss had handed him, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The image showed Sarah, unmistakably pregnant and smiling, standing beside a man whose facial features seemed impossibly ancient. High cheekbones, deep-set eyes, and skin marked with intricate scarification that followed patterns Marcus had only seen in museum displays. "This is impossible," he whispered, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew denial wouldn't change what was right in front of him. Dr. Voss leaned forward, her weathered hands clasped tightly together. "I've spent my entire career studying the Kahani. Every historical record, every archaeological fragment, every oral tradition from neighboring tribes, they all point to the same conclusion. The last confirmed Kahani died in 1823 during the great sickness that swept through this region." "Then how do you explain this?" Marcus held up the photograph, his voice rising. "How do you explain Sarah living with people who are supposed to be dead for 2 centuries? "I can't." The admission seemed to physically pain the elderly anthropologist. "But there's something else. Something I haven't told you yet." Marcus felt his stomach clench. "What?" Dr. Voss reached into her worn leather satchel and withdrew a small wooden carving. The artifact was clearly old, its surface polished smooth by countless hands. The figure depicted was unmistakably female, her belly swollen with pregnancy, and carved around her form were symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the lamplight. "This was found in a Kiani burial site in 1987, she said. "According to the translations we managed, it's called the Bearer of the New Path." Kiani mythology spoke of a woman from the outside world who would come to them carrying a child that would bridge two worlds. Marcus stared at the carving, noting how the carved woman's features bore an unsettling resemblance to Sarah. "You're suggesting what, exactly? That Sarah stumbled into some ancient prophecy?" "I'm suggesting that maybe she didn't stumble into anything. Maybe she was brought there." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. "That's insane. You're talking about—" "I'm talking about patterns that don't make sense any other way." Dr. Voss's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her fear. Sarah was conducting a routine survey in an area she'd been to dozens of times before. She knew those woods better than anyone. How does someone that experienced just get lost? Marcus's radio crackled to life, saving him from having to answer a question that was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. "Base camp to Chen. We've got movement at the tree line. Multiple figures approaching from the northwest." He grabbed the radio, his pulse quickening. "How many?" "Hard to tell in this light. At least 6, maybe more. They're not trying to hide." Marcus was already moving toward the tent flap when Dr. Voss grabbed his arm. "Marcus, wait. If these are Kiani, approaching their territory wrong could be seen as an act of aggression. Let me come with you. I know their customs." "You know customs from books written by people who are dead," Marcus replied, but he didn't shake off her grip. The truth was, he needed all the help he could get. They emerged from the tent to find the entire rescue team in a state of controlled tension. Rifles were ready but not raised, flashlights sweeping the forest edge where shapes moved between the trees like shadows given form. Marcus raised his binoculars and felt his breath catch. The figures stepping into the clearing weren't just indigenous people, they were something else entirely. Their clothing was a mixture of traditional materials and items that had clearly come from the modern world, but altered, adapted. One man wore what looked like a park ranger's jacket, but it had been decorated with bone beads and feathers. A woman carried a backpack that Marcus recognized as standard hiking gear, but symbols had been carved into the leather with painstaking precision. "Jesus," whispered Tom Bradley, the lead tracker. "Are those our missing hikers' belongings?" Dr. Voss stepped forward slowly, her hands visible and empty. She spoke in a language Marcus didn't recognize, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. The figures stopped, and one of them, an elderly man with white hair that fell to his shoulders, responded in the same tongue. "They want to talk," she said, "but only to the leader. Only to you." "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That we're here for Sarah, but Marcus—" She hesitated, glancing back at the waiting figures. "The man I spoke to, their elder. He knows things about our world that he shouldn't know. He mentioned the helicopter that brought us here, described our equipment perfectly. These people have been watching us for longer than we realized." Marcus felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him, both from his own team and from the forest dwellers who had materialized from the darkness. Whatever was happening here went far deeper than a simple rescue mission. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows across Sarah's face as she stared into the flames. Marcus had been waiting 3 days for her to speak, and now that she finally seemed ready, he found himself almost afraid to hear what she had to say. "You want to know why I can't leave?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why I told you to go back and forget you ever found me?" Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. Beside him, Jenny shifted nervously, her camera equipment forgotten in her lap. Tom sat rigid, his jaw clenched, while Rodriguez kept glancing toward the tree line as if expecting something to emerge from the darkness. Sarah's hand moved to her swollen belly, a protective gesture that had become unconscious over the months. "It started with the surveys. The university thought they were sending me to document plant species, map the ecosystem. Standard anthropological work." She laughed bitterly, but Meridian Industries had already been here. They'd been here for 2 years. The mining company? Jenny leaned forward. But there's no mining operation out here. Not mining. Testing. Sarah's eyes met Marcus's across the fire. They found something in the deep caves, something that shouldn't exist, samples that dated back further than anything science could explain. They needed an anthropologist to help them understand what they'd discovered. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves overhead with a sound like whispered warnings. One of the tribal members, an elderly woman with intricate scarification covering her arms, appeared at the edge of the firelight, spoke quietly to Sarah in their clicking language, then melted back into the shadows. "They're keeping watch," Sarah explained. "They know you're here, and they're afraid." "Afraid of what?" Marcus demanded. "Sarah, none of this makes sense. You've been missing for 8 months. Your family thinks you're dead. Whatever Meridian did unleashed something that was meant to stay buried." Sarah's voice cut through his words like a blade. "The tribe you think went extinct? They didn't disappear. They went into hiding, deep into these forests, away from the outside world, because they're the guardians." Rodriguez finally spoke up. "Guardians of what?" Sarah was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she wouldn't answer. When she did, her words chilled him to the bone. Tom's hand moved instinctively to his rifle. Changed how? Imagine a virus that doesn't just infect, it rewrites. DNA, neural pathways, base instincts. The company thought they could control it, use it. They set up a temporary lab in the caves, brought in researchers. Sarah's voice cracked. "I was one of them." The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. Marcus watched them disappear into the darkness and felt a growing dread in his chest. "The outbreak happened on my 3rd week there. The organisms had been dormant in the deep cave systems for centuries, maybe millennia, but once exposed to modern human DNA," she shuddered. "The research team didn't die, they transformed into something that hunts, that spreads, that can't be killed by conventional means." Jenny's face had gone pale. "The tribe took you in?" "They saved me. Found me half dead at the cave entrance, already infected but not yet turned. They have ways, ancient knowledge passed down through generations, of stopping the progression, but only if you stay here, in the deep forest, away from the outside world." Marcus felt the pieces clicking together with horrible clarity. "The pregnancy. The child carries both human DNA and traces of the organism. If I return to civilization, if my baby is born in a hospital exposed to modern medical procedures." Sarah's hand pressed protectively against her belly. "The organism could mutate again, adapt to current human populations. It would spread through the medical system, through blood banks, through air conditioning systems." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at his sister, seeing her clearly for the first time since their reunion, the subtle changes in her features, the way her eyes seemed to catch and reflect the firelight differently, the fact that she moved with an uncanny stillness. "How long do we have?" Rodriguez asked quietly. "Before what?" "Before the things in the caves realize we're here." Sarah's expression hardened. "They already know. They've been tracking you since you entered the forest. The only reason you're still alive is because the tribe has been protecting you." She stood, her movements fluid despite her pregnancy. "Meridian sealed the main cave entrance, but there are other ways out. And they're learning to hunt in daylight." As if summoned by her words, a sound echoed through the forest, something between a howl and a mechanical screech that made every primitive instinct in Marcus's body scream in terror. "Too late," Sarah whispered. "They're coming." The satellite phone crackled to life in Marcus Chen's tent at 3 in the morning, jolting him from uneasy dreams. Sarah's voice came through distorted but urgent, cutting through static like a knife through fog. "Marcus, you need to get back here. Now." He sat up, instantly alert. Sarah never used that tone unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. "What's happening?" "It's Elena. She's changing." The line went dead. Marcus was dressed and moving within minutes, his mind racing as he navigated the dark forest path by headlamp. Sarah had stayed behind at the village while he'd hiked to higher ground seeking better reception to contact the university. The plan had been simple: gather more information about Elena's condition, document everything, then figure out how to proceed. But nothing about this situation had gone according to plan. The village appeared unchanged as he approached, cooking fires still glowing softly between the traditional shelters. But something felt different. The usual night sounds seemed muted, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Several tribal members stood at the settlement's edge, their faces grave in the firelight. Sarah emerged from Elena's hut before he could call out. Even in the dim light, he could see the strain etched across her features. "Thank God you're back," she whispered, gripping his arm. "I don't know what to do. She won't let me examine her properly, and the tribal healer keeps saying things I can't understand. But Marcus—" She paused, searching for words. "I think she's right about not being able to leave." They ducked into the hut where Elena lay on a woven mat, her husband Kyle beside her. In the 12 hours since Marcus had left, her condition had visibly deteriorated. Her skin had taken on an almost translucent quality, veins showing dark beneath like ink spreading through water. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They seemed to glow with an inner light that had nothing to do with the fire's reflection. "Elena?" Marcus knelt beside her, keeping his voice gentle. "How are you feeling?" She turned toward him, and when she smiled he noticed her teeth seemed sharper than before. "The forest is taking me back," she said, her voice carrying an odd harmonic quality. "It's reclaiming what was always its own." "What does that mean?" Sarah interjected, her medical training warring with the impossibility of what she was witnessing. "Elena, I need to understand what's happening to your body. These changes, they're not normal pregnancy symptoms." Elena's laugh held no humor. "Normal? Nothing about this place follows your rules, Sarah. The tribe didn't just survive here for 2 centuries in secret. They evolved, adapted, became something new." She placed a protective hand over her swollen belly. "And now I'm becoming it too." Kyle spoke in their clicking language, his words urgent. Elena listened, then translated. "He says the forest chose me. That's why I was drawn here, why I felt compelled to leave the survey team that day. It needed someone from the outside world, fresh genetics to ensure the tribe's future." "That's impossible," Marcus said, though even as he spoke, he remembered the strange dreams he'd been having since arriving. The way certain plants seemed to pulse with life when he looked at them too long. "Is it?" Elena struggled to sit up, and in the firelight, Marcus could see that her fingernails had grown longer, developing a woody texture like bark. "You've studied indigenous cultures, Marcus. You know how isolated populations adapt to their environments. But what if the adaptation went deeper? What if the forest itself became part of the evolutionary equation?" Sarah pulled out her medical scanner, hands shaking slightly. "I'm reading cellular activity I've never seen before. It's like your DNA is being rewritten in real time." She looked up, fear evident in her eyes. "Elena, this could kill you, or transform me into something that can live here permanently." Elena's voice carried a strange peace. "I've seen what happens to those who try to leave once the change begins. The tribal elder showed me the bones of others who were called here over the years, explorers, researchers, lost travelers. The forest claimed them all, but only those who fought the transformation died. Those who accepted it," she gestured toward the sleeping village, "they became part of something larger." A rustling outside made them all freeze. Through the hut's opening, Marcus glimpsed movement among the trees, shadows that seemed too large and fluid to be human, yet moved with purpose and intelligence. "The forest guardians," Elena whispered. "They're gathering. The birth is close, and they want to witness the joining of 2 worlds." She gripped Marcus's hand with surprising strength. "You have a choice to make, both of you. You can try to leave, try to bring rescue teams and scientists to study us like specimens, but if you do, the forest will stop you. It's protected this place for too long to let it be exposed now." Sarah's equipment beeped urgently. "Elena, your vitals are spiking. Whatever's happening, it's accelerating." "Then it's time," Elena said, her eyes now definitely glowing in the darkness. "Time for you to decide whether you're observers or participants in what comes next." The rifle felt cold against Marcus's palms as he crouched behind a fallen log, watching the tree line. 3 hours had passed since Sarah's warning about the others coming, and the forest had grown unnaturally quiet. Even the insects seemed to have fled. Marcus shook his head, eyes never leaving the shadows between the trees. Sarah knows things she shouldn't know. The memory of her pale, knowing stare made his skin crawl. "We need to assume they're already here." A twig snapped somewhere to their left. Both froze. Tom's voice crackled through the radio, barely audible. "Movement northeast quadrant. Multiple contacts." Marcus keyed his radio twice in acknowledgement, not daring to speak. The rescue team had positioned themselves in a loose perimeter around the Kiowa village, but he was beginning to realize how foolish that strategy was. They were the ones being hunted now. The first figure emerged from the undergrowth like smoke given form. Marcus blinked, certain his eyes were playing tricks. The man, if it was a man, moved with fluid grace that seemed to defy the dense vegetation. His skin bore the same intricate markings as the Kiowa, but these were deeper, more complex, covering every visible inch of flesh. Dr. Vasquez grabbed his arm, fingernails digging through his sleeve. One of the figures had turned directly toward their hiding spot, tilting his head with predatory curiosity. The man's eyes caught the filtered sunlight, reflecting it back with an amber gleam that belonged more to an animal than a human. "They can see us," Elena breathed. The amber-eyed man raised his hand, and the others began moving. Not toward the rescue team, Marcus realized with growing dread, but toward the village itself. They flowed through the trees like water, converging on the settlement where Sarah waited with her adopted tribe. A scream pierced the air, high, agonized, and distinctly human. But it came from behind them, from Tom's position. Marcus spun around, rifle raised, and saw his teammate stumbling backward from the tree line. Tom's hands clawed at his neck, where a thin dart protruded from the skin. His eyes rolled back as he collapsed. "Move!" Marcus grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her toward the village. Whatever was happening here, staying separated meant death. They crashed through the underbrush, abandoning stealth for speed. Behind them, Marcus could hear the whisper of bare feet on forest floor, gaining ground with impossible swiftness. A dart whizzed past his ear, embedding itself in a tree trunk with a soft thunk. The village clearing opened before them, but the scene that greeted them defied comprehension. The Kiowa villagers stood in perfect formation around the central fire, their faces serene despite the chaos erupting around them. Sarah sat cross-legged in their midst, her pregnant belly prominent beneath traditional wrappings, her expression peaceful. The attackers, the others as Sarah had called them, had already entered the clearing. But instead of violence, Marcus witnessed something far more disturbing. The two groups faced each other across the fire, and he could see the family resemblance now. The same bone structure, the same fluid movements, the same inhuman grace. "Sarah!" Elena called out, breaking away from Marcus despite his grip on her wrist. "We have to go, now!" Sarah's head turned slowly, as if Elena's voice came from very far away. When she smiled, Marcus saw something that made his blood freeze. Her teeth had changed. They were longer now, sharper, filed to points that gleamed in the firelight. "You don't understand," Sarah said, her voice carrying an odd harmonic quality that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones. "They're not here to hurt us. They're here because of what's coming." The amber-eyed leader stepped forward, speaking in a language that hurt to hear. Not the melodic tones of the Kiowa dialect, but something older, more primal. Sarah nodded as if she understood perfectly. "A child," she continued, placing both hands on her swollen belly. "It's almost time. And when it arrives, everything changes. The old boundaries, the old rules, they won't matter anymore." Marcus felt Elena trembling beside him as more of the mysterious figures emerged from the forest. They kept coming, an endless stream of them, until the clearing was packed with bodies that moved in perfect synchronization. "Sarah, you're sick," Elena pleaded. "Whatever they've done to you, whatever they've told you, we can fix this. We can help." Sarah's laugh was like wind chimes made of bone. "Help?" She struggled to her feet, accepting assistance from the nearest Kiowa woman. "Dr. Vasquez, you still think this is about rescue, about returning to your world of concrete and steel?" She stepped closer, and Marcus raised his rifle instinctively. The motion caused a ripple of tension through both groups of indigenous people, but Sarah held up a hand. "The forest is dying," she said simply, "and we are its antibodies." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood at the edge of the firelight, her hand protectively cradling her swollen belly, while the rescue team stared at her in stunned disbelief. The painted faces of the Keth-Mori warriors emerged from the shadows behind her, their eyes reflecting the flames like wild animals caught in headlights. "You can't be serious," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "Elena, you've been missing for 3 months. Your husband, your colleagues, everyone thinks you're dead." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Dead would be kinder than what awaits me out there." She turned toward the tribal elder, speaking in their clicking, melodious language. The old man nodded gravely and gestured for the warriors to lower their weapons, though they remained poised for action. Dr. Harrison stepped forward, his weathered face etched with concern. "Elena, I've known you since you were a graduate student. This isn't like you. What could possibly make you abandon everything? Everything I thought I knew was a lie." Her voice carried a weight that seemed to age her before their eyes. "The Keth-Mori didn't vanish 2 centuries ago. They were driven into hiding, and now that I've seen what they're protecting themselves from, I understand why they can never be discovered." The forest around them seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Strange, phosphorescent fungi cast an eerie blue glow on the ancient trees, and somewhere in the distance, an inhuman cry echoed through the canopy. Marcus felt the hair on his arms stand on end. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "Protecting themselves from what?" Elena's eyes darted to the darkness beyond the camp's perimeter. "The same thing that's been following you since you entered their territory. You felt it, didn't you? The wrongness in the air, the way the normal forest sounds die away in certain areas?" Marcus exchanged glances with his team. They had all noticed the strange dead zones during their trek, places where even the insects fell silent and the temperature dropped by several degrees. He'd attributed it to natural phenomenon, perhaps underground caves or mineral deposits. 3 months ago, I was conducting my survey near the old growth section when I stumbled into one of their sacred groves, Elena continued. "I should have died. The Keth-Mori warriors found me unconscious, covered in some kind of residue, a black substance that burned like acid wherever it touched." She pulled back her shirt sleeve, revealing a network of silvery scars that seemed to writhe in the firelight. The rescue team recoiled instinctively. "The tribal healer, Ithara, saved my life, but in doing so, she exposed their greatest secret." Elena's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "The Keth-Mori aren't just guardians of this forest, they're guardians against something that lives beneath it, something that's been contained here for centuries." Dr. Harrison scoffed, though his voice lacked conviction. "Elena, you're talking about folklore, tribal mythology mixed with pregnancy hormones and isolation. We need to get you to a hospital for proper medical—" "Look at me," she snapped, her composure finally cracking. "Really look at me. Does this seem like delusion?" "The exposure changed me," she said quietly. "Changed us." She placed both hands on her belly. "Whatever's down there, it's ancient, older than human civilization. The Keth-Mori's ancestors made a pact with it long ago. They would keep others away and it would remain dormant. But if I leave this place, if I return to the outside world—" A bone-chilling howl rose from the forest depths, closer this time. The Keth-Mori warriors tensed, speaking urgently among themselves in their native tongue. "It's stirring," Elena said, her face pale with terror. "My presence here, your presence. It's all connected now. The thing beneath recognizes what I've become. If I leave, it will follow. It will spread beyond these boundaries." Marcus felt his skepticism wavering as another inhuman cry answered the first, then another. The sounds were getting closer, and they definitely weren't coming from any animal he could identify. "Even if what you're saying is true," he said desperately, "there has to be another way. Medical science, research facilities." "You still don't understand." Elena's voice carried infinite sadness. "I'm not just infected, I'm becoming something else, something it can use as a bridge to the surface world." She looked down at her unborn child. "We both are." The fire suddenly dimmed, as if an invisible presence had passed through the camp. In the growing darkness, Marcus could swear he saw shapes moving between the trees, shapes that belonged to no earthly creature. "It's too late for rescue," Elena whispered. "Now we have to focus on containment." The ritual circle formed at dusk, just as Sarah had described. Marcus watched from behind a massive cedar as the Kaitani emerged from their dwellings, moving with an otherworldly grace that made his skin crawl. Their faces bore intricate painted designs that seemed to shift and dance in the firelight, creating an optical illusion that hurt to look at directly. Sarah stood at the center, her swollen belly prominent beneath a dress woven from what appeared to be human hair. The sight made Marcus's stomach lurch, but he forced himself to keep watching. Elena crouched beside him, her camera ready despite the poor lighting conditions. "This is insane," Detective Rodriguez whispered from their left. "We need to extract her now before whatever this is gets worse." Dr. Whitmore raised a trembling hand for silence. The elderly anthropologist's face was pale with fear, but his eyes remained fixed on the scene before them. "Look at the symbols," he breathed. "They're not just ceremonial markings, they're moving." Marcus squinted at the painted designs covering the trees surrounding the clearing. At first, they appeared to be simple geometric patterns, but as his eyes adjusted, he could see Whitmore was right. The symbols writhed like living things, pulsing with a rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. The eldest Kaitani, the one Sarah had called the Keeper, began to chant in a language that predated any known linguistic family. The words seemed to bypass Marcus's ears entirely, resonating directly in his bones. Around the circle, the other tribe members joined in, their voices creating harmonies that no human throat should have been able to produce. Sarah began to sway, her hands resting protectively on her belly. When she opened her mouth to sing, the sound that emerged was not her voice. It was deeper, older, carrying undertones that made the hair on Marcus's arms stand on end. The baby inside her kicked visibly, pressing against her skin in ways that defied anatomy. "Jesus Christ," Elena whispered, lowering her camera with shaking hands. "What's happening to her?" The painted symbols on the trees began to glow with a sickly green phosphorescence. The air itself seemed to thicken, taking on a quality that made breathing difficult. Marcus felt something crawling along his skin, not insects, but something far worse, something that existed in the spaces between perception and reality. Through the supernatural haze, Sarah's transformation became apparent. Her skin had taken on a translucent quality, revealing a network of dark veins that pulsed with unnatural life. Her eyes, when she turned toward their hiding spot, reflected the firelight like an animal's. "She knows we're here," Rodriguez said, reaching for his weapon. "Don't," Whitmore hissed. "Any sudden movement could trigger something we can't control." The Keeper raised both arms toward the canopy, and the chanting reached a crescendo that made reality itself seem to vibrate. The trees groaned and creaked despite the absence of wind. In the distance, something howled, not with the voice of any forest creature, but with the sound of hunger given form. Sarah's transformation accelerated. Her fingers elongated, taking on a claw-like appearance. When she smiled, her teeth had multiplied into rows like a shark's. The baby inside her moved with increasing violence, causing her belly to distort in impossible ways. "A convergence," Whitmore whispered, his voice filled with academic fascination and primal terror. "They're preparing for the birth. But not just any birth, they're opening a doorway." Marcus felt his rational mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. The symbols weren't just glowing now, they were lifting off the trees, floating in the air like luminous parasites. Where they touched the ground, the earth itself began to blister and crack. The Kaitani began to change as well. Their painted faces melted and reformed, revealing features that belonged to no earthly species. Their bodies stretched and contracted, as if reality couldn't quite decide what shape they should hold. They were not human. Perhaps they never had been. "We have to go," Elena said, backing away from the clearing. "We have to go right now." But it was too late. Sarah turned to face them directly, her transformed features clearly visible in the supernatural light. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of something vast and ancient. "Marcus," she called, her words echoing impossibly in the confined space. "You came for me. How touching. But you don't understand what you're witnessing. This isn't a corruption or an infection. This is evolution. This is what humanity was always meant to become." The baby kicked again, and this time something pushed back from the outside of her belly. A handprint, far too large to belong to an unborn child, pressed against her skin from within. "The old gods are returning," Sarah continued, her shark-like smile widening impossibly. "And I'm going to birth their herald into this world. You can stay and witness the beginning of a new age, or you can run back to your dying civilization, but you cannot stop what's already begun." The symbols in the air began to coalesce, forming a pattern that hurt to perceive directly. Reality started to fray at the edges. Marcus grabbed Elena's hand and ran. The expedition's radio crackled to life at dawn, Sarah's voice cutting through the static with an urgency that made everyone freeze. "Base camp, this is Dr. Chen. We've found her. We've found Elena Vasquez." Marcus grabbed the handset, his knuckles white. "Sarah, thank God. What's her condition? Is the baby?" "She's alive. The baby appears healthy. But Marcus—" Sarah's voice faltered, and the silence stretched uncomfortably long. "You need to get up here. Bring the medical team, but also bring Dr. Harrison from cultural anthropology. And Marcus, come prepared for anything." The helicopter ride to the coordinates Sarah provided took them deeper into the Amazon than any of them had ventured before. Ancient trees formed a canopy so thick that sunlight barely penetrated, creating a twilight world of shadows and mist. When they finally landed in a small clearing, Marcus could hear the distant sound of chanting carried on the wind. Sarah emerged from the tree line looking haggard, her usually pristine field clothes torn and muddy. Behind her walked Elena Vasquez, very much alive and heavily pregnant, but transformed in ways that made Marcus's breath catch. Her hair was woven with feathers and beads, her skin marked with intricate painted designs, and her eyes held a strange, almost luminous quality that seemed to reflect the filtered light. "Elena," Marcus breathed, stepping forward. "We've been searching for months. Your family, your colleagues, everyone thought you were dead." Elena's hand moved protectively to her swollen belly. "I know why you've come, but you don't understand. None of you understand what you're dealing with here." Dr. Harrison, the anthropologist, was already pulling out his camera and notebook. "This is extraordinary. Sarah mentioned a tribe, but I assumed it was a known group. These markings, this artwork, I've never seen anything like it." "That's because they're not in any of your books," Elena said, her voice carrying an odd resonance. "The Yakarana were declared extinct in 1823 after the rubber tappers came through, but they didn't die. They chose to step away from a world that was destroying everything they held sacred." Marcus noticed movement in the tree line, figures that seemed to shimmer and fade like mirages. "Elena, we need to get you to a hospital. The baby could come any day, and out here, my child will be born into a world of balance and truth," Elena interrupted. "In your world, she would be born into chaos and death." Sarah moved closer to Marcus, her voice low. "She's been like this since we found her. She won't consider leaving, and the tribe—" Sarah gestured toward the forest. "They're protecting her. Not threatening, protecting. But there's something else, Marcus. Something she told me about why she can't return." Elena overheard and laughed, but the sound was hollow. "Can't return? It's not that I can't return, Dr. Reeves. It's that if I do, if any of us do, we'll bring something back with us that will destroy everything." "Not disease," Elena said, and her eyes seemed to glow brighter. Knowledge. The Yakarana have spent 2 centuries learning to contain something that was unleashed when the first Europeans came to the Amazon. Something that feeds on human greed and expansion, that grows stronger with every tree cut down, every species driven extinct. Marcus felt a chill despite the humid air. Elena, you're not making sense. You've been isolated too long. We need to get you proper medical attention, and I'm carrying their child, Elena said simply, and the words hit the group like a physical blow. Not just any child, a bridge between worlds. She can contain what needs to be contained, but only if she's born here, raised here, never exposed to the corruption of the outside world. The chanting from the forest grew louder, and more figures became visible in the shadows, tall, graceful people whose movements seemed to bend light around them. Marcus realized with growing horror that they weren't entirely human, not anymore. The Yakarana found a way to evolve, Elena continued, her hand still on her belly, to become something that could stand against what's coming. But that evolution requires sacrifice, requires isolation. If I leave, if my daughter is born in your world, the balance breaks. The thing they've been containing for 2 centuries will be free to spread. Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm. The satellite images from this region, the anomalous readings we've been getting for months, the unexplained ecological changes spreading outward from here. Elena nodded grimly. It's already starting to leak through. Every day we delay, every attempt to rescue me weakens their containment. You came here to save one life, Dr. Reeves, but you may have doomed millions. The chanting stopped abruptly, and the forest fell silent except for the sound of Marcus's racing heartbeat. The morning mist clung to the forest floor like a shroud as Marcus led the team deeper into territory that felt increasingly foreign despite being only miles from their starting point. Sarah walked beside him, her notebook clutched against her chest, while Dr. Chen brought up the rear with his medical kit bouncing against his hip. The Takani guides had grown silent, their earlier chatter replaced by meaningful glances and hushed words in their ancient tongue. "Something's wrong," Sarah whispered, noticing how the birds had stopped singing entirely. Even the ever-present buzz of insects had faded to an unnatural quiet. Marcus nodded, his hand instinctively moving to the GPS device that had been malfunctioning since dawn. The readings made no sense. According to the coordinates, they should have been standing in the middle of a river that was nowhere to be seen. Instead, towering trees surrounded them, their bark marked with symbols that seemed to shift when viewed directly. "You came," she said, though her tone suggested this outcome was inevitable rather than hoped for. "We're here to help," Dr. Chen said, stepping forward with his medical bag. "You need proper prenatal care, Elena. I need nothing from your world," she interrupted, placing a protective hand over her swollen belly. "But there are things you need to understand before you go back. Things that will save your lives." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "What are you talking about?" Elena gestured for them to follow her off the main path. They walked in single file through undergrowth that seemed to part before Elena's steps and close behind them. Within minutes, they emerged into a clearing where the Takani village spread out like something from a fever dream. The structures defied conventional architecture, buildings that seemed grown rather than built, their walls pulsing with a subtle bioluminescence. Children played between houses that cast no shadows despite the bright morning sun. Adults went about their daily tasks with movements that seemed choreographed by some unseen force. "My God," Dr. Chen breathed, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "Not God," Elena said softly. "Something older. Something that was here long before your ancestors learned to make fire." She led them to the center of the village, where an ancient stone circle marked with the same shifting symbols dominated the space. The stones hummed with a frequency just below hearing, making Marcus's teeth ache. "The Takani didn't go extinct," Elena explained, settling onto a moss-covered log with the careful movements of late pregnancy. "They evolved. 200 years ago, when the colonizers came with their diseases and weapons, the tribe made a choice. They withdrew from your reality. That's impossible, Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. Is it? Elena's laugh held no humor. You've been walking for 3 hours, but your GPS says you haven't moved. The sun is shining, but nothing casts a shadow. Your cell phone stopped working the moment you entered the sacred grove. Tell me what's impossible here. Marcus checked his phone reflexively. No signal, and stranger still, the battery showed full charge despite being nearly dead when they'd started walking. The forest is alive, Elena continued, her hand tracing patterns on her belly. Not in the way your scientists understand life. It's aware, conscious. The Takani learned to live in harmony with that consciousness, and in return it protected them from the outside world. An elderly Takani woman approached, carrying a carved bowl filled with dark liquid. She offered it to Elena, who drank deeply before continuing. But the harmony requires balance. The forest has been tolerant of your encroachment because the Takani have acted as mediators. We've kept the peace between worlds. We? Dr. Chen noticed her choice of words. Elena's smile was sad and knowing. My child will be born between worlds, neither fully human nor fully Takani, but something new, something necessary. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The logging operations, the development projects. You're saying they're disturbing something that shouldn't be disturbed. I'm saying that your people are about to break a treaty they don't even know exists. And when that happens, Elena stood slowly, her tattooed skin seeming to shimmer in the filtered sunlight. The forest will no longer distinguish between those who mean harm and those who simply exist in the wrong place at the wrong time. Thunder rumbled overhead despite the clear sky, and the stone circle's humming grew louder. That's why I can never return to your world, Elena said, her voice barely audible over the rising sound. Because I'm the only thing standing between two realities that are about to collide. The morning air carried the scent of smoke and something else, something that made Marcus's stomach clench with dread. He crouched behind a fallen log, watching the rescue team's camp through his binoculars. What he saw defied explanation. 3 of the 6 team members sat motionless around their extinguished fire, their eyes reflecting an unsettling emptiness. They breathed, they blinked, but something fundamental was missing. Dr. Patricia Vance, the team's physician, slowly turned her head toward Marcus's hiding spot with mechanical precision, though he was certain she couldn't see him from this distance. We need to go, Sarah whispered beside him, her voice barely audible. Now. But Marcus couldn't tear his gaze away. The other 3 team members, including Captain Rodriguez, were nowhere to be seen. The missing men's equipment lay scattered around the camp as if abandoned mid-task. A radio crackled with static, repeating an automated distress signal that no one seemed inclined to answer. Where are the others? Marcus breathed. Sarah's hand gripped his shoulder. Look at their necks. A branch snapped behind them. Marcus spun around to find Captain Rodriguez emerging from the tree line, but this wasn't the hardened military officer who had led them into the forest. Rodriguez moved with the same mechanical deliberation as the others, his eyes holding that same vacant quality. The telltale mark adorned his neck like a grotesque medal. Dr. Chen requests your presence, Rodriguez said, his voice flat and emotionless. The integration process requires additional subjects. Marcus grabbed Sarah's hand and bolted. They crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at their clothes and skin. Behind them, Rodriguez pursued with inhuman persistence, never seeming to tire or slow despite the dense terrain. The cave system, Sarah gasped as they ran. Elena showed me. There's another entrance north of here. They veered toward a rocky outcropping, where Sarah had explored with Elena days earlier. The sound of pursuit never faded, joined now by additional footsteps. The other team members had joined the hunt, moving through the forest with coordinated precision that spoke of a shared consciousness. Marcus risked a glance backward and immediately wished he hadn't. All 6 rescue team members now followed them, including the 3 he'd thought were still in camp. They moved as one entity, their paths through the forest creating a perfect search pattern designed to cut off any escape route. The cave entrance appeared ahead, a narrow opening barely visible behind hanging vines. Sarah dove through first with Marcus close behind. The darkness swallowed them, but they kept moving, hands trailing along the wet stone walls for guidance. "They won't follow us in here," Sarah whispered, though her voice carried uncertainty. The cave system stretched deeper than Marcus had expected, branching into multiple passages that seemed to wind through the mountain's core. Strange markings covered the walls, not the ancient pictographs they'd seen in the village, but something newer. Mathematical equations and biological diagrams covered every available surface, drawn in what looked suspiciously like dried blood. "Sarah," Marcus called softly, "you need to see this." She joined him beside a particularly detailed section of wall art. The diagrams depicted human nervous systems, with disturbing modifications, additional neural pathways extending from the brainstem, connecting to external organisms that resembled the creatures they'd encountered in the forest. Notes, in Elena's handwriting, filled the margins, documenting what appeared to be a systematic study of biological integration. "She's been working with them," Sarah whispered. "This isn't kidnapping or coercion. She's actively participating in whatever this is." A low humming echoed from deeper in the cave system. The sound wasn't mechanical, it was organic, like a collective heartbeat or shared breathing pattern. As they listened, Marcus realized he could distinguish individual voices within the harmony, including one he recognized. Elena's voice drifted through the tunnels, but she wasn't speaking words. Instead, she produced a series of complex tonal patterns that seemed to resonate with the cave walls themselves. Other voices joined her, some human, others decidedly not. "We have to find another way out," Marcus said. "Whatever's happening here, we can't face it head-on." But as they turned to retrace their steps, a familiar figure blocked their path. Dr. Patricia Vance stood silhouetted against the cave entrance, her modified neural pathways visible beneath her skin like glowing circuitry. Behind her, the rest of the rescue team waited with infinite patience. "Dr. Chen has been most instructive," Vance said, her voice carrying harmonics that made Marcus's teeth ache. "She has shown us the future of human evolution. You will understand soon." The humming from the depths grew louder, and Marcus realized they were trapped between two impossible choices: face the transformed rescue team or venture deeper into whatever awaited them in the mountain's heart. The ancient shaman's eyes bore into Sarah's soul as she knelt before the ceremonial fire, her swollen belly pressing against her crossed legs. The flames cast dancing shadows across the weathered faces of the tribal elders, their expressions grave as they witnessed what no outsider had ever seen: the ritual of binding. "You understand what this means?" the shaman whispered in the old tongue that Sarah had learned with frightening ease over the past months. "Once the blood covenant is sealed, there is no return. The spirits of the forest will claim you as their own." Sarah nodded, her hand instinctively moving to protect her unborn child. Behind her, she could hear the muffled protests of Marcus and Dr. Chen, still bound and guarded by tribal warriors. They didn't understand. They couldn't comprehend the magnitude of what she was preventing. The shaman lifted a curved obsidian blade, its surface gleaming like black water. "The child carries both worlds within its blood," he continued. "Born of the ancient line and the new world, it will be the bridge between what was and what must be." Sarah's mind raced back to the moment 3 days ago when she'd first felt the change beginning, the fever that wouldn't break, the whispers in languages she'd never studied but somehow understood, the visions of vast underground chambers filled with creatures that defied classification. Her colleagues thought she was suffering from some tropical illness, but the truth was far more terrifying. The baby kicked violently as the shaman began chanting, and Sarah gasped. Each movement felt like electricity coursing through her veins, awakening something that had been dormant in her bloodline for generations. The anthropologist in her recognized the implications. She was living proof that the tribe's oral histories were more than mere legends. "Sarah, please." Marcus's voice cracked with desperation. "Whatever they've told you, whatever you think you know, we can work it out back home. There are doctors, specialists. She turned to face him, and he recoiled at what he saw in her eyes. They were no longer entirely human. Flecks of gold swirled in her irises, pulsing with each heartbeat like molten metal. "You still don't understand," she said, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. "There is no going back home. The moment I set foot in your world again, it would trigger something that humanity isn't ready for. The treaty that's kept them sleeping for 2 centuries would be broken." Dr. Chen struggled against his bonds. "Them? Who are you talking about?" The shaman answered for her, his ancient voice carrying the weight of forbidden knowledge. "The first ones, those who ruled before man learned to make fire. They sleep beneath the cities of the modern world, held in check only by the agreement our ancestors made when they disappeared from recorded history." Sarah closed her eyes as another wave of transformation washed over her. She could feel her DNA rewriting itself, unlocking sequences that had been locked away since the dawn of civilization. The baby was the key, part human, part something far older and more powerful. "The government knew," she whispered, the revelation hitting her like a physical blow. "The research grant, the specific location they sent me to survey, it wasn't random. They've been tracking bloodlines, waiting for someone like me to make contact." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Her unusual aptitude for ancient languages, her inexplicable ability to navigate by instinct through uncharted wilderness, the recurring dreams that had plagued her since childhood, all signs of her heritage manifesting. Marcus's face went pale. "That's impossible. The university board, the funding committee, they're just academics." "No," Sarah said, standing with fluid grace despite her advanced pregnancy. "Some of them are guardians. Others are those who want to wake the sleepers and reclaim what was lost. That's why I can never leave this place. My return would signal that the bloodline has awakened and both sides would come for the child." The shaman raised the obsidian blade higher, its edge catching the firelight. The ritual must be completed before the moon sets. Already the modern world stirs. We have felt their machines probing the forest's edge, their metal birds circling like carrion feeders. Sarah looked at her colleagues one last time, memorizing their faces. "Tell them I died in childbirth. Tell them the tribe was hostile, that you barely escaped with your lives. Make them believe there's nothing here worth returning for." "We can't do that," Dr. Chen protested. "There are protocols, investigations." "Then millions will die when the ancient cities crack open," Sarah replied. "The first ones don't distinguish between innocent and guilty. To them, all of modern humanity is an infestation to be cleansed." She knelt again before the fire, offering her palm to the shaman's blade. As the obsidian bit into her flesh, Sarah felt the last of her former life slip away. The blood that dripped onto the sacred stones sealed more than just her fate. It bound the sleeping nightmares for another generation. The child within her kicked once more, and Sarah smiled through her tears. Her sacrifice would give the world time, even if no one would ever know the price she'd paid. The ancient chamber trembled as Sarah's words echoed off the stone walls. Marcus felt the weight of her revelation settling over him like a burial shroud. The tribe that had saved her, that had shown her such kindness, they were dying because of what she carried. "The pathogen adapts," Sarah continued, her voice barely a whisper. "It doesn't just kill, it learns. Every immune system it encounters, every defense mechanism, it catalogues them, evolves past them. That's why the Kythara retreated here 2 centuries ago. They weren't conquered by disease or war, they were running from this." Elder Amara stepped forward, her weathered face grave in the flickering torchlight. She spoke in the Kythara tongue, and Sarah translated with obvious reluctance. "She says the old stories tell of a great sickness that followed the pale strangers. Not just any sickness. One that grew stronger with each person it touched. The Kythara called it the hunger that learns. They sealed themselves away, choosing isolation over extinction." Marcus's mind raced. "But you said it was dormant, that it only activated because of your pregnancy." "Hormonal changes, stress, immunological shifts. Something triggered it. Sarah's hand moved protectively to her belly. The scary part is, I feel fine. Better than fine, actually. The pathogen isn't trying to kill me, it's using me. Dr. Chen had been taking readings with his portable equipment throughout their conversation. Now he looked up, his face pale. Sarah, your core temperature is 3 degrees above normal, but you're not showing any signs of fever. Your heart rate is elevated but steady. It's like your body is overclocked. Enhanced, Sarah corrected. I haven't needed more than 3 hours of sleep since this began. My stamina is incredible. My mind feels sharper than it's ever been. The pathogen is optimizing its host. For what purpose? Marcus demanded. Before Sarah could answer, a commotion erupted from the tunnel behind them. Shouts echoed through the stone passages, growing closer. The remaining Kithara warriors who had accompanied them burst into the chamber, speaking rapidly to Elder Amara. Sarah's face went white. The government team found the entrance. They're coming down. Marcus grabbed her arm. Then we leave. Now, there has to be another way out. You don't understand. Sarah pulled away from him. They can't be exposed to this. None of them can go back to the outside world now. The terrible implication hit Marcus like a physical blow. What are you saying? Elder Amara was already issuing orders. The Kithara moved with practiced efficiency, some heading toward the tunnels, while others began gathering what appeared to be ceremonial items from alcoves around the chamber. They've done this before, Sarah said, watching them work. When outsiders get too close, when the risk becomes too great, they have protocols. The sound of boots on stone grew louder. Male voices speaking English, accompanied by the harsh beam of LED flashlights cutting through the ancient darkness. Dr. Miller? Dr. Miller, if you're down here, we're here to help. Marcus recognized Agent Harrison's voice. Relief flooded through him until he saw Sarah's expression. They're not going to let them leave, she said simply. They can't. As if summoned by her words, more Kithara appeared from hidden passages throughout the chamber. They moved silently, like shadows given form, carrying weapons that looked both primitive and deadly effective. These weren't the peaceful villagers Marcus had observed above ground. These were guardians, protectors of secrets that had been kept for 2 centuries. Sarah, listen to me. Marcus gripped her shoulders. There has to be another way. We can contain this, study it, find a cure. With what? Her eyes blazed in the torchlight. The pathogen has had months to establish itself in my system. It's not just in my bloodstream, it's integrated into my cellular structure. And now it's adapting to everyone who comes into contact with me. Dr. Chen looked up sharply from his equipment. What do you mean, adapting? Sarah met his gaze steadily. How long have you been feeling more alert than usual, Doctor? When did you last feel tired? Really tired? Chen's face went ashen. He looked down at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. The 3 of you have been exposed for hours now, Sarah continued. In an enclosed space, breathing recycled air. The pathogen doesn't just spread through direct contact, it's airborne in close quarters. Marcus felt his world tilting off its axis. You're saying we're infected? I'm saying you're the next generation of carriers. And if that government team takes any of us back to civilization... She didn't need to finish the sentence. The voices in the tunnel were much closer now. Elder Amara spoke urgently to Sarah, who nodded grimly. She says we have perhaps 5 minutes before they reach this chamber. After that, the choice will be taken from all of us. Marcus stared at the tunnel entrance, then at Sarah, then at the Kithara warriors positioned throughout the chamber like silent sentinels. 5 minutes to decide the fate of everyone who had come looking for answers. 5 minutes before the hunger that learns would claim them all. The ancient clearing pulsed with an energy that made Marcus's skin crawl. Sarah stood at its center, her arms wrapped protectively around her swollen belly, while the tribe members formed a loose circle around the perimeter. Their painted faces were solemn, eyes reflecting a knowledge that seemed to span centuries. You have to understand, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the space between them. The baby isn't just mine anymore. It's theirs too. It's the bridge. Detective Rivera stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon before he caught himself. Sarah, whatever they've told you, whatever they've done to you, we can get you help, medical attention, professional counseling. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Help? You think this is some kind of Stockholm syndrome? She gestured to the tribe members, their silent presence somehow more unsettling than any threat. They didn't kidnap me, Detective. They saved me, saved us all. Marcus felt his patience fraying. 3 days of tracking through impossible terrain, following a woman who seemed to vanish and reappear at will, had pushed him beyond his limits. Then explain it, Sarah. Make us understand why you're choosing to live like this when you have a life, a career, people who care about you. Sarah's expression softened slightly, but her resolve remained unshaken. The Keth Mori aren't extinct, Marcus. They never were. They went into hiding because they're the guardians, the last line of defense against something that's been sleeping in these mountains for longer than recorded history. The wind picked up, rustling through the canopy above them with an almost musical quality. Dr. Chen, who had been studying the petroglyphs carved into the surrounding trees, looked up with growing alarm. "These symbols," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They're not just tribal markings, they're warnings, instructions, some kind of containment protocol." Elder Tahara stepped forward, speaking in the lilting language of his people. Sarah translated without being asked, her fluency startling. "He says the time of hiding is ending. The old bindings are weakening. My child," she paused, placing both hands on her belly, "carries the bloodline needed to reinforce them." Rivera shook his head. "Sarah, listen to yourself. You're talking about ancient curses, supernatural guardians. This is the 21st century. Is it?" Sarah's eyes blazed with an intensity that made them all step back. "Then explain how I've been pregnant for 7 months, Detective. Explain how the medical records show I should have given birth weeks ago, but the baby is still growing, still changing." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd seen the timeline, had assumed there was some mistake in the documentation, but looking at Sarah now, seeing the way the tribe members watched her with something approaching reverence. "The mining operation," Dr. Chen said suddenly, pieces falling into place. "That's why you were really here, wasn't it? Not for the survey work. You knew about them." Sarah nodded slowly. "The university assignment was a cover. I'd been researching the Keth Mori for years, following traces in colonial documents, unexplained disappearances, geological anomalies. When Petrichor Industries started their exploratory drilling, the signs became impossible to ignore. One of the younger tribe members approached, carrying something wrapped in intricately woven cloth. Elder Tahara accepted it reverently, then held it out toward the group. Even from a distance, Marcus could feel the wrongness radiating from whatever lay within. "This was brought up by their drill," Sarah explained, "a fragment of something that should have stayed buried. The moment it breached the surface, the old protections began to fail." The wrapped object seemed to pulse with its own dark rhythm, and Marcus found his vision blurring as he tried to focus on it. Beside him, Rivera had gone pale, one hand pressed to his temple as if fighting off a sudden headache. "Put it away," Dr. Chen gasped, stumbling backward. "Whatever that is, it doesn't belong in our world." Elder Tahara rewrapped the fragment carefully, but its influence lingered in the air like smoke. The trees around them seemed to lean inward, shadows deepening despite the afternoon sun. "Now you begin to understand," Sarah said. "This is bigger than one missing person, bigger than tribal rights or academic discovery. If I leave, if I take this child back to civilization, the last barrier falls. And what comes after?" She trailed off, her face haunted. Marcus felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. His job was to bring Sarah home safely, to reunite her with her family and normal life. But the evidence before him, the wrongness in the air, the way reality seemed thin in this place, suggested that normal no longer applied. "How long?" he asked quietly. "How long do we have before it doesn't matter anymore?" Sarah looked up at the sky, where storm clouds were gathering with unnatural speed. The elders say 3 days, maybe less. The mining crew is scheduled to resume drilling tomorrow. The cave mouth yawned before them like a wound in the earth, exhaling the musty breath of centuries. Sarah's hand trembled as she placed it against the stone, feeling the vibrations that had called to her for months. Stronger now, more insistent. "This is where it began," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind that howled through the valley, where the first outbreak started 200 years ago. Marcus stepped beside her, rifle lowered but ready. The tribal warriors flanked them, their painted faces grim with ancient knowledge. Behind them, the rescue team huddled together, finally understanding that they weren't here to save anyone. They were here to prevent a catastrophe. "The Spanish explorers found this place first," Sarah continued, her eyes distant with the weight of inherited memory. "They broke through the sealed entrance, thinking they'd discovered a gold mine. Instead, they found something far older, something that had been sleeping in the deep places of the earth." Dr. Chen moved closer, his scientific mind still struggling to process what he'd learned. "The spores, they're not from any known organism." "Because they're not from here," Sarah said simply. "They came from somewhere else, sometime else. The cave system extends for miles underground, connecting to chambers that shouldn't exist, according to any geological survey. The tribe's ancestors were the first to encounter the contamination, to learn to live with it. They became its guardians, its prison wardens." A sound echoed from within the cave, a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to resonate in their bones. The tribal elder, his face painted with intricate symbols, spoke in his ancient tongue. Sarah translated without thinking, the language now as natural to her as breathing. "He says the barriers are weakening, the old protections are failing." Marcus felt his radio crackle to life, static-filled voices from the outside world demanding updates, wanting coordinates, threatening to send in military support. He reached for it, but Sarah's hand caught his wrist. "You can't," she said. "If they come here, if they try to study this place, contain it, weaponize it, it will be the end of everything." The spores respond to disruption, to modern technology. They're already agitated by our presence. The ground beneath their feet shuddered, and dust cascaded from the cave ceiling. Somewhere in the darkness beyond, something vast was stirring. Sarah's condition was accelerating, her skin now showing the same intricate patterns that marked the tribe. But unlike the peaceful integration she'd described, this transformation seemed urgent, desperate. "There's another way," she said, turning to face the group. "The tribe has maintained the balance for 2 centuries, but they're dying out. The bloodlines are too thin, the knowledge too fragmented. They need fresh perspectives, new guardians who understand both worlds." Sarah nodded. "The spores aren't malevolent. They're ancient, alien perhaps, but not evil. They seek harmony, connection. The horror stories, the extinctions, those happened when people fought the integration, when they tried to resist or exploit instead of understand." Another tremor shook the cave, stronger this time. Through the opening, they could see strange lights dancing in the depths, bioluminescent displays that pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm. The tribal warriors began to chant, their voices joining in harmonies that seemed to calm the disturbance. Marcus made his decision. He raised his radio and spoke clearly into it. "Base camp, this is Marcus. Mission parameters have changed. The target is not in distress and does not require rescue. Repeat, no rescue needed. We're withdrawing from the area. Do not send additional teams." Static erupted from the device, angry voices demanding explanations. Marcus looked at Sarah one last time, seeing not the woman he'd hoped to save, but someone who had found her true purpose. He switched off the radio and placed it on the ground. "What happens now?" Dr. Chen asked. Sarah smiled, and for a moment she looked like her old self, the brilliant scientist who had always pushed boundaries. "Now we make a choice. We can return to civilization and spend the rest of our lives knowing what we've left unguarded, or we can stay and learn, become part of something larger than ourselves." The cave's luminescence pulsed brighter, and the chanting of the tribe rose in intensity. Sarah walked toward the entrance, her transformed skin beginning to glow with the same ethereal light. At the threshold, she paused and looked back. "The old world is ending anyway," she said. "Climate change, wars, extinctions, we're destroying ourselves slowly. This offers something different, a chance to be part of nature instead of its enemy." One by one, the members of the rescue team faced their choice. As the ancient guardians watched and the cave sang its otherworldly song, they had to decide whether to flee back to a dying civilization or step forward into an unknown but living future. The forest held its breath, waiting,